In the early 13th century, a new power emerged from the harsh Mongolian steppe under the banner of Genghis Khan, who united the disparate tribes into an unrivaled war machine. After crushing the Western Xia and Jin in the east, Genghis Khan turned his attention to the west, where alien kingdoms and tribes remained beyond his control. During the Western campaign, he assigned his two most talented generals, Jebe and Subutai, a special mission to pursue the remnants of the collapsed Khwarezm Empire and to probe deeper into the strength and structure of the European powers. The expedition began in Central Asia, moving southwest through the rugged Caucasus Mountains. When they reached the city of Durban, the famous ancient stone gate of the Caucasus, the people refused to surrender. Yi promised to spare their lives if they provided 10 guides. And as a warning against treachery, he executed one of them. Despite gaining passage, the Mongols had to abandon their heavy catapults and lose hundreds of men to snowstorms and the rugged terrain. However, that did not stop them. As they descended from the Caucasus, they encountered fertile plains, nomads, and indigenous tribes who had not yet grasped the approaching iron storm. Soon after leaving the mountains, the Mongols encountered a powerful alliance, the Leskians, Alans, and Churases, who together mustered some 50,000 men. Seeing the threat as too great, the Cumans, powerful Turk nomadic people who controlled the area from Lake Balkhash to the Black Sea, joined in, even drawing in the Volga Bulgars and Khazars. The Cuman Grand Chieftain Khotan placed his army under the command of his brother Yuri and his son Daniel. Against this alliance, the Mongols adopted their classic strategy: divide and conquer. They sent envoys to the Koman chieftains, reminding them of Turk-Mongol friendship and promising to share the spoils if the Cumans retreated, abandoning their allies. And the ruse worked. The Cumans, either hesitant or greedy, withdrew from the alliance. The Mongols immediately attacked, routed the remaining forces, and then turned on them, pursuing and destroying the two Cumans' retreating wings. Thousands of Cuman cavalrymen were killed. Leaders were slain. Strachan was sacked. The Mongols won not only with swords and spears, but also with promises and treachery, the most dangerous weapons on the steppe. But the nightmare for the Cumans was not over. The Mongols pursued the remnants of the Cuman army northwest, all the way to the borders of the Rus' principalities. Khotan, the powerful Cuman Khan, fled with his remaining army to his son-in-law, the Galatian prince Mstislav Mstovich. In the fugitive's gasping breath, Khotan warned, "Today the Mongols took our land. Tomorrow they will take yours." At first, the Rus' principalities were skeptical. For decades, the Cumans had been raiding the Rus' territory, burning villages and taking slaves. Many Rus' princes saw the Cumans as enemies rather than allies. But then news came. The Mongols were advancing along the Dniester River, approaching the border. Panic spread throughout the cities. Kiev, Galatia, Chernigov, Mstislav of Galatia, along with Mstislav III of Kiev, and even Yuri, II of Vladimir Suzdal, finally agreed. We must join forces to fight the common enemy. In the smoke of incense and tense meetings, a grand alliance was formed, bringing together the Rus' principalities and the remnants of the Cuman army, determined to stop the Mongol horse. For Subutai and Jebe, this was no longer just a chase for the remnants of their army, but the first test. Would their discipline, cunning, and tactics be enough to crush a massive Western coalition? And on the plains before them, the armies were converging towards a fateful rendezvous, the banks of the Kalka River, the site of one of the most epic ambushes in military history. As Subutai and Jebe's Mongol army advanced north across the Caucasus, terrifying rumors began to spread in the plains south of Rus. A cavalry force from the east, riding like the wind, has burned the city and slaughtered the surrendered. These rumors quickly reached the ears of the nomadic tribes, especially the Cumans and their allies, the Alans, who were accustomed to fighting on the steppe but had never encountered such an enemy. Subutai and Jebe's journey now began much further afield. Initially awaiting orders from Genghis Khan, they marched through western Iran, sweeping through city after city. Then they advanced to Azerbaijan, where they accepted a large ransom to spare the wealthy city of Tabriz. They then continued across the Caucasus, defeating the outnumbered Georgian army, and then ravaged western Iran such as Hamadan, rather than risk an attack on Baghdad. In late 1221, they turned north again, routed another Georgian army, and plundered the kingdom at will. Only then did they receive official permission from Genghis Khan to advance further west. The two Mongol generals crossed the Caucasus again, encountering a new alliance of Circassians, Alans, and Lesbians, along with the Cumans. Rather than confront them hidden, Subutai and Jebe immediately launched a divisive attack. They invoked Turo-Mongol nomadic friendship and promised to share the spoils to lure the Cumans. Faced with the prospect of bloodshed and the promise of riches, some Cuman leaders wavered and turned their backs on their allies. The slightest crack in the alliance would have caused the collapse of the fragile alliance. Result: the Mongols quickly defeated the Circassians, Alans, Lesgians, then turned to pursue the Cumans themselves, dividing them into groups and destroying them, even taking back the gold and silver they had bribed to retreat. Not stopping there, the Mongols also sent a small army to Crimea, attacked the trading posts of Genoa, destroyed the city of Saya before chasing the remnants of the Cumans, fleeing north towards the land of Rus. The Cumans, although famous for being good knights, did not have a single leader. They existed in tribes, loosely allied, often at odds, only uniting when there was great danger. As for the Alans, the remnants of a people who once established a powerful kingdom on the steppe, were now only a small but brave force, still maintaining the tradition of heavily armored cavalry. But under the pressure of the Mongols, and especially after the incredibly rapid defeats, their morale was quickly eroded. In the first steps of the expedition, Subutai and Jebe had demonstrated the Mongols' characteristic strength, not relying on numbers or weapons alone, but using fear, internal divisions, and betrayal to break up seemingly secure alliances. And now, as the remnants of the Cuman army fled north, they brought with them horror stories of the Mongol cavalry, sowing panic in the hearts of the Rus principalities. It was these same Cumans, driven to the brink of defeat, who would appeal to the Rus princes for help in the beginning of a new alliance and the bloody battle on the Kalka River. As Subutai and Jebe's horses left the Caucasus, the remnants of the Cuman army fled in terror, carrying with them the terrifying tale of an army never seen before. Swift as the wind, disciplined as steel, and ruthless as a sandstorm. The news traveled across the vast grasslands, crept along the trade routes, and reached the gates of Kiev and Rus, sowing panic in the principalities still divided by power and ambition. Kiev and Rus, by the early 13th century, was no longer a unified empire. Principalities such as Kiev, Galish, Chernigov, Smolensk, Linsky, and Vladimir Suzdal were all ruled by individual princes, loosely bound together in common, but often suspicious of and even fighting each other. Each prince had his army, his ambitions, and family pride that sometimes outweighed the fear of losing his country. Faced with a threat from the east, Mstislav III of Kiev, one of the most powerful princes, understood that only unity could save Rus. He sent letters everywhere, summoning the great and small dukes to a conference, calling for them to put aside their differences and face the common enemy. Amid the incense smoke of domed churches and the ringing of bells on the Dnieper, an unprecedented alliance was formed. Kiev, Gallic, Chernigov, Smolensk, and even the remnants of the Common Army, those who had just escaped the disaster, full of revenge. In name, the alliance gathered nearly 80,000 troops, including Rus's heavy cavalry, archers, infantry, and the swift Common cavalry. But beneath the impressive numbers, divisions were simmering. No one yielded supreme command. The Rus princes obeyed only their orders, and the Cumans, though skilled in battle, fought only for their vendettas, not entirely loyal to their new allies. Meanwhile, Subutai and Jebe led only about 20,000 cavalry, a mix of Mongol cavalry and some Turk warriors. From the south, they advanced northwestward across the lower TK River, then circled the Kuban River, skirted the coast of the Sea of Azov, and headed north, a long and treacherous route, but one that allowed them to avoid the Rus' advance and to choose the terrain to their advantage. The Rus and Cumans, having assembled near Kiev and Gallic, marched south and southeast down the Dnieper River, then turned east along the west bank of the Kalka River. Their intention was to stop the Mongols before they could wreak further havoc. In the spring of 1223, two major forces began to approach each other. The Rus-Cuman alliance from the west and northwest, while Subutai and Jebe deliberately retreated to the southeast, both probing and luring the enemy deep into the vast steppe away from reinforcements and supplies. Both sides, two worlds, two ways of thinking about war, were being drawn toward an inevitable meeting point, the Kalka River, where the low grassy hills, shallow streams, and marshes became the stage for a carefully calculated tragedy. In the spring of 1223, on the vast plains of the Kalka River, one of the most elaborate ambushes in military history was about to be written. The encounter began a long and troubled journey for both sides, spanning hundreds of miles of rugged steppe and mountains. After destroying the remnants of the Khwarezm Empire and crossing the rugged peaks of the Caucasus, the Mongol army led by the two generals Subutai and Jebe, some 20,000 cavalry, advanced into the northern Black Sea plain along the eastern bank of the Dnieper River. They planned to join up with Yochi, the eldest son of Genghis Khan, who had come from the Aral Lake region. But Yoki fell ill and reinforcements did not arrive. Knowing that they could not expect reinforcements, Subutai and Jebe decided to push further, probing the strength of the Rus and the nomadic tribes. On the opposite side, the bad news spread rapidly through the Rus principalities: Kiev, Galatia, Volhynia, Chernigov, and Kursk. At the call of Prince Mstislav III of Kiev, an alliance was formed. Joined by about 5,000 Koman cavalry, who had just fled from the Mongol defeat and were now seeking revenge, the Rus and Koman armies advanced from different directions. The Galatians and Volhynians from the southwest followed the river down. The Kavans and Chernigs from the north also along the river. The Kursks advanced directly from the east, while the Kuman cavalry intended to circle the Mongols to attack their rear. They aimed to force the Mongol army stationed on the east bank of the Dnieper into a pincer attack. The Mongols, realizing that they were being pursued, immediately retreated to the southeast, avoiding encirclement while leaving a small rearguard of about 1,000 men under Hambeck to watch and lure the enemy. The Rus and Kumans quickly crossed the Dnieper, destroyed this small army, and believed themselves to be on the winning side, unaware that it was a trap. Meanwhile, Jebe and Subutai, aware of the approach of the Rus, sent messengers to Mstislav of Kiev, asserting that the Mongols were only after the Kumans and had no enmity with the Rus. But Mstislav of Kiev executed the messengers, an act that cut off any possibility of reconciliation and formally declared war. When the Rus were aware that the Rus were approaching, the two Mongol generals withdrew further east, leaving behind a trail of ruins to further convince the enemy that the Mongols were fleeing in panic. For 9 long days, the Mongol army retreated from the plains east of the Dnieper River, across the steppes north of the Sea of Azov, leading their opponents into the land they had chosen for their battle. The Rus and Kumans, confident in their numbers, pursued from the west of the Dnieper across the long steppe, gradually moving farther from their rear and becoming tired and undisciplined. The Koman cavalry, eager for revenge, often broke away from the main Rus formation. Meanwhile, Subutai and Jebe patiently watched, waiting for the decisive moment. Finally, the two sides met on the banks of the Kalka River, a small river that flows into the Sea of Azov. When they arrived, the Rus army divided into wings, each commanded by a separate duke: Galatia, Volhynia, Kursk, Chernig. No one obeyed the other. Meanwhile, the Koman cavalry charged straight across the river, rushing forward, eager to fight the enemy. The Mongols pretended to continue their retreat, luring the Kumans deep into the other side of the Kala, cutting them off from the main Rus army that was still crossing the river behind them. At that moment, Subutai and Jebe gave the signal. From both flanks, north and south of the Kala, the Mongol cavalry ambushed like two scissors closing, surrounding the Kuman cavalry. Behind, the Rus army continued to cross the river, some making it through, some still stuck. The Mongol cavalry, skilled in archery, galloped and rained arrows, turning the Kuman formation into chaos, then quickly swept across, attacking the Rus army that had just crossed the river. Subutai, with the skill of a seasoned strategist, waited until more than half of the Rus army had crossed the river, then launched a full-scale frontal attack. The Mongol cavalry came from 3 sides, turning the Kala plain into a giant pocket. The heavily armored Rus army could not maneuver on the vast steppe, while the Mongols attacked with lightning speed, withdrawing and charging again. The Chernigof army, unaware that the battle had begun, charged straight up and collided with the retreating Cumans, further disrupting the formation. The Mongols also threw smoke bombs, causing the Rus armies to lose contact and become even more divided. The Rus Dukes' efforts to rally their troops failed. Each small detachment was separated and destroyed one by one. Finally, as the remaining Rus and Cumans retreated to their riverside camps, Subutai struck his decisive blow. He broke through the wooden fence and charged straight into the center. In an instant, the Rus collapsed and the Kalka River ran red with blood. History books record that tens of thousands were killed in just a few hours. The corpses strewn across the grass were a testament to the brutality of Mongol tactics. Part of Mstislav, the Bold's army, was lucky enough to break through the siege and retreat north. Meanwhile, Mstislav of Kiev, with about 10,000 men, retreated west, setting up camp on the hills along the Dnieper River, hoping to defend himself. But the Mongol cavalry quickly followed, surrounded the camp, and eventually destroyed it. Mstislav of Kiev and the Dukes were forced to negotiate for mercy, believing in the Mongol promise of life for surrender. But Subutai needed no prisoners. They were captured, buried under planks above which the Mongols feasted. A cold and brutal ritual, as if to say, "This is the price of division and arrogance." The Battle of Kalka nominally lasted only a day. But in reality, it was the climax of a week-long seduction campaign starting in the Caucasus Mountains across the northern Black Sea plain, ending at the Kalka River, where Subutai and Jebe, with patience and calculation, crushed a seemingly invincible alliance. After the Mongols' triumphant shouts on the banks of the Kalka, all that remained were fields of corpses and horses, broken shields, broken spears, and the stench of dried blood. The spring sun shone on the scarred armor, revealing a harsh truth. The mighty alliance of the Rus and Cumans had collapsed in a single decisive battle. According to historical sources, the defeat was devastating. Richard Gabriel estimates that the Rus lost up to 50,000 men, while the primary chronicle records around 10,000 dead. The Nikonian Chronicle, though less reliable, puts the figure at 60,000. The Novgorodian First Chronicle, the most reliable contemporary source, does not give figures, simply stating that only 1 in 10 returned, implying that the bulk of the army had been destroyed. The entire Allied force was pinned against the river with no way to retreat. Only Mstislav, the Bold, and Daniel of Alalinia survived, saving a portion of the army, while most of the other princes, including Mstislav of Kiev, fell to the Mongols. The Rus principalities, already divided, were now further disintegrated. This defeat cost not only tens of thousands of soldiers, but also the people's faith in the princes who had once called themselves the shields of the Rus lands. The name of Mstislav of Kiev, once a rallying cry for unity, was now associated with the image of a powerless commander lured into a trap and eventually humiliated to death. The image of the princes crushed under planks of wood above which the enemy feasted became a painful symbol etched in the memory of Rus for centuries. The Mongols sat and celebrated, leaving those buried beneath them to suffocate and break their bones as a cold, cruel and humiliating punishment. The news spread like wildfire across the plains. In Kiev, Novgorod, Chernihiv, and the larger cities, people whispered about the Mongol cavalry, who were not only skilled in archery, but also terrorized by their tactics and cold patience. Trade routes were disrupted, steppe villages panicked, and many communities fled north to escape the storm from the east. The Russ's alliance was more fragile than ever. The principalities, already divided, were increasingly suspicious and distrustful of the princes, who had once called themselves the Shield of Rus. For the Cumans, this defeat was a fatal blow. The remaining troops were fiercely pursued. Many chieftains were killed. Others fled into exile in Hungary, carrying with them resentment and the remnants of their nomadic culture, but no longer strong enough to resist. The steppe north of the Black Sea, once ruled by nomadic tribes, quickly fell into the hands of the victors. After the victory at Kalka, Subutai and Jebe did not invade immediately. They pursued the Prince of Galicia, plundered several small towns in the south, and then turned east. On the way back, the Mongols crossed the Volga River near present-day Volga, but were defeated by the Volga Bulgarians at the Battle of Samara Bend, a rare event in history, forcing them to retreat. They then defeated the Kongamans near the Ural Mountains, killing their leader and forcing them to pay tribute. Finally, Subutai and Jebe marched 5,500 miles, about 8,900 kilometers. One of the longest cavalry expeditions in history, back to Genghis Khan in the eastern Sararia. Genghis Khan received them with praise and admiration, but Jebe did not survive long. Although the Mongols did not immediately conquer Rus, Subutai left behind a network of spies and Rus in Europe, gathering intelligence. The defeat at Kalka shook the foundations of Kiev and Rus, paving the way for the great disaster that followed. In 1237, Subutai and Batu Khan returned with 120,000 troops, conquering most of Rus, making what the Rus feared come true. That small expedition with only some 20,000 cavalry under Subutai and Jebe became a pattern repeated in subsequent Mongol campaigns in Poland, Hungary, and across Europe. Despite being outnumbered, they repeatedly won by dividing their allies, luring the enemy deep into a trap, and then delivering the decisive blow, only to have the enemy realize their mistake too late. Kalka was the West's first taste of Mongol-style warfare where discipline, speed, and cold strategy mattered more than numbers or courage. But Kalka's impact went far beyond a military victory. 'Twas a geopolitical earthquake that tipped the balance of power in Eastern Europe in favor of the East, paving the way for the birth of the Golden Horde, the Mongol Khitit that dominated the Russian plains, the northern Black Sea, and the Volga Basin. The political map of Eastern Europe was redrawn. The Rus principalities, already divided, became tributary vassals. The power of Kiev declined rapidly, giving way to the rise of Moscow and Vladimir. The Cumans, once a nomadic force that ruled the steppes, were disintegrated and fled to Hungary, seeking asylum, taking with them their customs, music, and unquenchable hatred. But Mongol rule also opened new doors. East-west trade routes were protected. goods and ideas circulated along the Silk Road, turning Sarai into a bustling trading center. Thanks to this connection, techniques, writings, and even architectural styles from Asia to Europe were exchanged and blended, even though the shadow of the Iron Horse remained behind. So Kala, in 1223, was not only a bloody defeat for the Rus and Cumans, but also a turning point that quietly changed the whole situation of Eastern Europe, opening the era of Mongol hegemony, spreading fear and also connecting distant lands by a road stained with iron and smoke. And from then on, the history of this entire continent was never the same again. The Battle of the Kalka River was not just a clash of swords and arrows. It was a brutal lesson carved into the memory of Rus and the steppe alike. A moment when courage alone met the cold logic of strategy and loss. From the scorched fields of Kala, the echoes of that day still remind us that unity and discipline can mean survival, and that underestimating your enemy can mean ruin. If this story moved you, help us keep history alive. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell so that tales of valor, tragedy, and hard-learned lessons continue to be told, not forgotten. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the past. And until the next battle, stay curious, stay brave.